At 1:48 a.m., 14 FP-2 strike drones were moving through the darkness toward Taganrog Central Air Base. They had one mission: make sure the next Russian combat sortie never left the ground. Ahead of them, Russian aircraft stood beneath the floodlights. Among them were a Tu-142 MK maritime patrol aircraft and a Tu-142 MR communications relay aircraft. Maintenance crews were preparing the next launch, with support equipment positioned along the flight line. Less than an hour later, aircraft and ground equipment would be burning. Sections of the airfield would be unusable. Most of the 14 drones would be shot down. Russian radar would remain active, and the launchers would keep firing. Yet the next Russian mission would never leave the ground. Ukraine did not need to destroy the air defense system. It only needed to control which threats the Russian crews saw first, and when the launchers opened fire. Then the first Ukrainian targets appeared on Russian radar. At 2:35 a.m., the 14-drone strike package was entering the outer surveillance zone. At a radar position beyond the airfield perimeter, the Costa Tu-142 began forming 5 tracks from the south and southeast. They were the first elements of the attack to appear clearly. Long-range strike drones normally stayed low, using roads, rooftops, and uneven ground to break up the radar picture. These 5 did the opposite. They held between 250 and 400 meters. Their speed remained constant. Their headings barely changed. With every sweep, the returns grew cleaner. One operator leaned toward the display and marked the group for immediate engagement. 5 tracks, stable movement, closing on the airfield. The data moved through the defense network. Beside the runway, a Pantsir system turned its fire control radar south. A nearby Tor M2U accepted 2 lower contacts. JTEL transmitters increased power across the same approach. Nothing in the response suggested confusion. No launcher left its assigned sector. No commander chased a distant diversion. The clearest threats received priority as the range continued to fall. To the Russian crews, all 14 drones appeared nearly identical. Their mission packages were not. 3 of the 5 leading drones carried passive radar reflectors beneath their fuselages. A 4th carried the obscurant package intended to cover the final approach. The reflectors did not make the drones resemble large aircraft. They simply kept the track steady and difficult to dismiss. Below, and nearly 70 seconds behind, 6 strike drones remained under 100 meters. 3 more approached from the east, still too distant to demand attention. On the Pantsir display, 1 reflector-equipped track separated from the others. Altitude, 310 meters. Range, 11 kilometers. The fire control radar began to lock. At 2:36 a.m., the fire control radar completed its lock. Inside the command vehicle, the Pantsir operator kept the lead reflector-equipped FP-2 centered, while the battery commander authorized the engagement. The launcher fired. A 57E-6 missile tore from the launcher and accelerated toward a speed of 1,300 meters per second. At that speed, the lead drone had only seconds left. The shot had come almost 3 kilometers earlier than the strike planners expected. The lead group was supposed to be intercepted near the industrial district, where burning wreckage and smoke could complicate the final approach. At the current distance, the debris would fall short. The corridor ahead of the runway would remain relatively clear for radar confirmation and optical tracking. Then the electromagnetic environment changed. Passive warning receivers aboard the strike element detected the fire control emissions tightening around the lead target. The missile launch confirmed the trigger. Nearly 70 seconds behind, the 6-drone strike element executed a response programmed before takeoff. All 6 pushed down through 100 meters. Their spacing widened. 2 separated from the central approach line. 1 reduced power and slipped farther behind. No remote pilot transmitted a new instruction. The launch itself was the signal. The Pantsir crew had made the correct engagement, but the reflector-equipped group had drawn the missile too soon. A different drone in the lead group carried the obscurant payload beneath its fuselage. Its flight controller forced it lower and cut speed, trying to move the release point almost 3 kilometers closer to the runway. The main strike element was now moving, but the corridor prepared for it was forming in the wrong place. To move the planned obscurant screen closer to the runway, the drone carrying the payload kept descending. That correction brought it directly into the Tu-142's engagement zone. Inside the Tor vehicle, the crew held the lower track steady and completed a firing solution. At the same time, the Pantsir crew shifted its attention toward a second reflector-equipped drone. Less than 60 seconds after the first launch, 2 drones from the lead group were under attack. The Tor launcher fired at the descending obscurant carrier. The 57E6 launched moments earlier reached the first reflector-equipped drone first. It broke apart above the southern approach, scattering burning fragments across several hundred meters of open ground. On the Russian displays, the raid appeared to be losing cohesion, but the obscurant carrying drone continued forward. It dropped toward the industrial rooftops and held just enough speed to reach the revised release point. The Tor missile was closing at several times the drone's speed. The payload compartment opened. Within 10 seconds, smoke and metallic fibers spread across several hundred meters of the approach corridor. The obscurant did not blind the radars. It slowed visual confirmation and made the remaining low-flying contacts harder to classify. Across the southern approach, the visual picture deteriorated first. Camera images lost contrast. Infrared screens filled with hot debris and drifting smoke. One crew member adjusted the display, but the low-flying drones began blending into rooftops and ground clutter. Then the Tor missile struck. The obscurant carrying drone disappeared, but the smoke and metallic fibers continued to spread. Elsewhere in the wreckage field, a radar reflector tore free from the first destroyed drone and fell as a separate return. For several more sweeps, the destroyed drones still appeared as 2 fading tracks. A radar operator noticed that one return was losing horizontal speed too quickly. He lowered its priority. Moments later, Pantsir eliminated another lead track. The remaining drones fell short after losing control. None of the 5 would reach the aircraft line, but all had already served their purpose. The lead group had completed its mission, but the same trick would not work twice. At 2:38 a.m., the 6th drone strike element reached the thinning edge of the obscurant corridor. One drone trailed the FP2 ahead by 11 seconds. Another was already sliding west of the planned route. 2 followed the railway and warehouse roofs. The last remained farther behind, still holding its distance. On the Russian displays, the picture was becoming cleaner. Tracks that had lost horizontal speed were pushed down the priority list. Falling reflectors and wreckage faded from attention. 2 returns continued holding speed through the debris. That was enough to identify them as real drones. Tor locked the first. Pantsir shifted toward the second. The obscurant had bought less time than the strike planners expected. If both drones were destroyed there, the low route toward the runway would collapse. Then a third FP2 broke upward and passed 220 meters. Its warhead had been assigned to the airfield, not to a diversion, but the climb made it the clearest threat on Tor's screen. The response had been programmed before takeoff. If the low formation was exposed, one armed drone would climb and draw the lock. The Tor crew shifted priority from the lower track to the rising drone and fired. The missile struck before the FP2 could level out. One of the 6 main warheads disappeared in a single flash. But while Tor completed the engagement, the 2 lower drones covered almost another kilometer. They had escaped Tor's immediate engagement window. Ahead, the Zhetel jamming field was already growing stronger. At 2:40 a.m., the Zhetel system increased power across the southern approach. Within seconds, the navigation picture began to degrade. Satellite signals weakened, position errors widened, and the surviving FP2s fell back on inertial guidance and stored route data. Those backups kept them moving. They did not keep them together. Across nearly 2 kilometers of industrial ground, the formation began coming apart in different ways. One drone drifted more than 600 meters east of its assigned route. Another dropped to less than 10 meters above a warehouse roof before correcting upward. The timing window was breaking apart. Instead of crossing the obscured sector together, the drones would now enter Tor and Pantsir coverage one at a time. Then, one guidance error became fatal. Position drift accumulated faster than the flight controller could correct it, believing it was several dozen meters farther south. The FP2 began its turn too early. Its wings struck the upper edge of a building. The drone disappeared in a burst of fragments before reaching the airfield. Ukraine had now lost 2 of the 6 main strike drones, 1/3 of the main strike element, without hitting a primary target. Another FP2 avoided the industrial complex, but the detour added nearly 20 seconds to its route. Farther east, a drifting drone stopped trying to recover the original approach. Unable to return to the aircraft parking area, its flight controller shifted to the nearest stored secondary target, support vehicles beside the taxiway. The original formation was gone. What approached the airfield now was smaller, scattered, and far less predictable. At 2:42 a.m., a Russian radar operator watched one fading return continue descending through the southern clutter. It had been marked as debris, but the return was still advancing toward the airfield at a steady rate. The operator restored the track. Range, 4.6 kilometers. Seconds later, 2 more contacts appeared through the thinning smoke. Their movement was low, steady, and directed toward the airfield. The pattern was finally clear. The surviving strike drones were following the same corridor opened by the destruction of the lead group. Tor and Pantsir divided the targets more precisely. The corridor was no longer a surprise. Then the drone that had drifted east under Zhetel interference crossed into open ground near the support vehicle area. Separated from the other contacts, it became the clearest track on the Pantsir display. The crew had only seconds to decide. If they held fire, the drone would enter the apron. If they fired, its wreckage could fall among their own vehicles and personnel. The commander authorized the shot. Pantsir fired. The missile detonated behind the FP2. Fragments tore into the rear section, and the damaged drone rolled left, losing dozens of meters of altitude in only a few seconds. It dropped into the maintenance area and struck a fuel support vehicle beside the service lane. Fire spread across the concrete. Within half a minute, black smoke spread across much of the support area. A fire engine turned away from the aircraft line. Ground crews abandoned equipment and ran for cover. The drone had failed to reach its original target, but its wreckage had created a different kind of opening. The Russian crews had finally cleaned up the radar picture. Now fire, emergency vehicles, and ground personnel were beginning to close the safe firing lanes around the apron. At 2:44 a.m., the 3 drones approaching from the east finally entered the inner defensive picture. They were no longer flying as a group. One turned toward the surveillance radar. Another aimed directly at the Tor position. The third continued toward the fuel area on the eastern side of the airfield. Their purpose was simple: force every Russian system to defend itself. Tor reacted first. Its crew locked the incoming drone, fired, and destroyed it before it reached the battery. The engagement ended faster than the strike planners expected. Within seconds, Tor shifted back toward the southern corridor. The opening was closing again. For the first time, the leading strike drone on the southern approach faced both Tor and Pantsir at close range. The final FP2 remained far behind, separated from the fight by 38 seconds. The first diversion had bought too little time. Then the FP2 assigned to the Eastern Logistics Area changed course. Its contingency logic triggered as Tor returned to the southern approach. The fuel target was dropped. Tor became the new priority. The drone climbed slightly, crossed the edge of the smoke, and turned directly toward the battery. Less than 3 kilometers remained. Tor shifted priority, confirmed the closing track, and fired. The FP2 disappeared before reaching the position. Its warhead never reached the logistics area. But the engagement bought 17 seconds. During that window, the leading southern drone covered more than 600 meters. It followed the edge of the black smoke rising from the burning support vehicles. Pantsir caught it only in short intervals. Radar held the track, but hangars, fire engines, and moving ground crews repeatedly narrowed the firing lane. The remaining eastern drone continued toward the surveillance radar, forcing another Russian crew to track a separate threat. Range on the southern contact fell below 1 kilometer. Pantsir fired a missile. The detonation rolled the FP2 left, but failed to destroy it. With little distance remaining, the damaged drone corrected its role and committed to the nearest aircraft. It struck the Tu-142 Mk near the wing root. Fire spread into the center fuselage. Across the apron, emergency crews turned toward the burning aircraft. On the Russian displays, the raid appeared to be ending. But the final FP2 had not yet crossed the industrial district. It was still 38 seconds behind. The gap between the final 2 strike drones was 38 seconds. For most of that time, no new stable track appeared south of the airfield. The Tu-142 Mk was burning near the wing root. 2 fire engines moved toward it, while a towing vehicle approached the remaining Tu-142 Mr. Ground crews crossed the taxiway through drifting smoke. The last eastern diversion had already fallen short of the surveillance radar after losing guidance in the jamming field. Pantsir continued scanning. Nothing appeared. Then a new return emerged behind the industrial district. Range, 1.5 kilometers. The timing matched no navigation failure. The 38-second separation had been deliberate. It remained outside the immediate engagement zone while Russian missiles were fired, radar crews sorted wreckage, and emergency vehicles entered the apron. Now the airfield had seconds to react. Pantsir acquired the target, but the firing lane was no longer clean. Between the launcher and the drone were fire engines, a towing vehicle, running personnel, the burning Tu-142 Mk, and the Tu-142 Mr. beginning to move. A missile detonation could scatter fragments across the rescue area. The commander withheld the missile shot. The guns offered a narrower, more controllable line of fire. Pantsir's twin 30mm cannons opened fire. A short burst cut through the smoke. Several rounds struck the FP2. The drone rolled, lost altitude, and began shedding fragments. But at less than a kilometer, it no longer needed perfect guidance. It only needed to keep moving. The damaged FP2 crossed the taxiway and struck the Tu-142 Mr. near the rear wing root. A second fireball rose above the apron. 2 separate columns of fire now marked the aircraft line. 14 drones had entered the attack. Only 2 reached the primary aircraft. That was enough. Russia destroyed most of the strike package and preserved both air defense systems. But both specialized aircraft were burning and unable to fly. The air defense network had survived. The sortie had not. Which moment opened the final path? The 38-second delay, the sacrifice that bought 17 seconds, or the smoke and rescue vehicles that closed the missile firing lane? Tell me which mattered most.